Hello and welcome to another episode of the Happy Sad podcast. I'm Blake and today I'm joined with Katy Roberts. It's a really exciting opportunity for me because Katy's been doing some really, really cool things for some areas of life that are very close to my heart, and I think what she's doing is amazing. And I will pass it quite quickly on to her because I'd love to hear from her what she's been up to and a little bit more of the details of why you're here. So hi Katy, welcome on.
Hi, I'm Katy, and thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm Katy. I live in Cornwall, and I'm very passionate about mental health. I mean, long story short, I lost my dad to suicide when I was 17, and I'm now 34. It's been a really long road, but I've now sort of got the courage and the strength and the drive to kind of just to want to help. And I think it's taken me a long time to get to that point. I think so now I'm on this kind of weird path, I guess, of like just wanting to help where I can. And I mean, the reason why you got in touch was because I've just got back. Well, not just, but over the summer I did this ride around the coast of Britain, which is why I'm here.
Yeah, very modestly just sprinkled in that cycle around Britain at the end there. But yeah, you quite literally cycled around the entire outline of Britain, and this was, I assume, to raise money alongside awareness, wasn't it, for both suicide and also I love the aspect of improvements of mental health through movement, which is something that you mentioned a few times. I think it's amazing that you're willing to do something so big to create those discussions, especially around those things that are considered a little bit more taboo. But we'll get into the kind of mental health stuff for sure. I think that's obviously a huge, the pinnacle of why that's so important. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about the ride itself. Like what made you decide to do the ride and how was it?
Wow, I mean, I've always wanted. When my dad passed away, I think I felt so helpless, and I felt so. I wanted to help. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to do something, and for years, that's always sort of been something in the back of my head. But it had to be like this enormous, like I had to swim around the whole world. It became this like unachievable thing. But for my own mental health as well, I just found I got quite into like, I sort of got into drinking and partying, and it was all quite self-destruct for a long, long time. And I've always been quite sporty as a kid, and then what snapped me out of that was I fell back into sport. So I used to swim competitively, and I got into swimming, and I just sort of found that was my sort of, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was my sort of meditation. That was my therapy. And I was like, God, and I basically just got addicted to sport. It always just helped me so much, being active and especially being outside. I think the drive to kind of want to do something just got more and more and more. And I actually joined someone who lost his sister to suicide on a bike ride. And that just changed everything for me, because that's the first time I was able to open up about how I lost my dad, because I think just survival mode, me and my family just kind of went like, we just didn't really talk about how he died, and so we just sort of closed off to it, and it's a weird topic to talk about, and like even my friend, no one knows how to talk about it. So I suddenly had this safe space where I could talk about it, and I was like, oh my God, that it felt euphoric. It felt like I was I can't really explain it. I just felt so, it was very emotional. Like afterwards I was like a total mess the next day, and I just thought there's something in that. Like, I've had therapy over the years and not found it that helpful, but I was like, there was something beautiful about being outside, not staring across the room for someone, sort of like, there was pauses, there was the scenery, and and then that's what sparked it for me, because I was like, maybe I could do that for other people. Maybe people could join me that have lost someone to suicide or have gone through their own mental health. And I was like, I don't know how I can help, but maybe I can just show people what has helped me. So like being outdoors, being on a bike and talking. So yeah, that's that's it.
Wow, it's so interesting that it took, you know, that action with someone else to kind of prompt the idea. And it's really, really interesting how impactful that can be, just other people and other humans, you know, remembering that we are all humans. And, you know, you just mentioned a safe space in that environment, and you literally use the word euphoric. And I think that's so interesting because I think that is, you know, true for a lot of people. But no, I think it's so impressive. And to decide to, you know, do that, even though it was with other people, you still did that alone. You know,
Yeah.
I assume someone wasn't with you the whole way.
No, yeah, it was crazy actually, because I kind of liked how it all panned out. Because at the first quarter, I hated. There was a lot of things that went wrong. My bike got squished. I had to go on antibiotics. It was just all scary, and I just was having not. I was like, I don't like this. And then it got really beautiful. And then I felt really. I was on my own, and I loved it. I was just in my element, and I actually got quite upset at one point because I was like, oh my god, it's so beautiful, and not and I felt very like privileged to be able to kind of like, wow, I'm looking at these beautiful views and my dad can't be here to see it. It was like bittersweet. I was like, this is so beautiful, and people, you know, you get so in your own bubble, and actually when you look out and the world's so much bigger than you, and I don't know, it was just like a really magical moment. And so that was really, I really enjoyed being on my own, and I wasn't scared, and that all just felt really powerful. And then the second half of the journey was lots and lots and lots of people and conversations, and so yeah, it was a really interesting journey.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How long did the ride take you in total?
Just under 3 months. So yeah, well, yeah, 3 months from beginning of June
Wow.
to August.
And,
Yeah,
and would you do it again?
yeah,
You would.
I would. Yeah.
You'll have to go do the coast of another country now.
I know. I was
And
like, but it was very, very wet, and part of me during it was like, oh, there's a reason why maybe not many people choose the UK to do, so maybe somewhere else. Yeah. Yeah.
there was actually a few other things as well. Like you mentioned a little bit about how parts of your mental health were on the ride. So I'd love to explore a little bit more about, firstly, how your mental health was on the ride, how you felt going into it. But there was another question that someone asked you on your story, which was, what did you learn about yourself on the ride? And I remember you wrote something so brilliant to open that response, which was literally, I can do it. And I think that was so cool. That there's just that idea of, it was brilliant. Yeah. And you did do it, you know.
Yeah.
And I really love that. But I'd love to know how it feels to know that you did do it. And then also just a little bit more about how your mental health was on the ride. And then we'll get into how it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. So weird, the whole ride in itself was quite strange for me to do. I've always been a bit of a worrier. I've like, you know, I've got to have my job, and I've got to, you know, and some people laugh at that because they're like, no, you seem really like, but it was such, I know I'm a big overthinker, so normally I have an idea and then I just kind of like I never follow through with stuff because I'm like, oh, it's too scary or whatever. But so that in itself, actually deciding to do the ride, you know, and planning it and going, I was like, that I was, even just that, I was like, well done. But my mental health, for me it was like, just don't overthink, just don't think about when you come back, don't think about, you know. And so that was my way of kind of coping and dealing with it. So when I was on the ride, when I was scared, I was like, you know, so one thing was feeling very vulnerable as a woman. And I'm very privileged to, you know, I live in Cornwall. I'm very privileged. I don't often feel unsafe. And, you know, I know that there's women and girls out there that feel unsafe all the time. And so that was a big kind of realization. And part of me was like, well, duh, you know, you're silly to be naive and not think that. But I'm glad it didn't stop me. But at the time that was scary, and I felt very vulnerable. There was definitely times where I was on my own and I just was like, I can't leave my bike. I need the toilet. I can't leave my bike. I need to get food. I can't leave my bike to get food. And I was like not eating, you know, I'd rock up to campsites, I'd run out of gas and I couldn't get food. And it was just like the basics had gone. And that's when I was just like, oh, this is horrible. So feeling sort of scared all the time, just not eating, just the basics. That was horrible. And there was definitely times where I was like, and I think the rain really got to me. I was like, I had 3 or 4 weeks of rain in Scotland, and I was like, my mental health is, I'm not good. This isn't good. I'm not having a good time. My mental health, like, how can I be advocating mental health when I'm like not okay? But every time I felt like I wanted to give up, someone showed up. Like, it was always people. It was like my sister came out and joined me. Like, she followed me in the car because she knew I was not good, and she kept just saying to me, just get to the next bit, and then there was always someone, and I'd have this powerful, beautiful conversation with someone that was struggling, and I was like, oh, that's why I'm doing this, and it just kept me going. So yeah, definitely roller coaster of emotions. And yeah, and like, it was quite difficult being, talking about suicide, talking about mental health, and hearing other people's pain, and I just, and yeah, that was really hard. And so yeah, but to overcome all of it, for me to go, I've done this, like, oh my god, I got to halfway, oh my god, I did that. That was for me, that I always struggled at school. I'm not very good at like following through with stuff. I never have much confidence with like going for jobs and things. For me to kind of go, yeah, you've done this. That was yeah, really magic.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And you touched on some really, really cool things there. There's two things you said that I'm particularly drawn towards because I think they resonate. I've realised that there's a lot of reasons that why you've done things maybe parallel with some of the reasons why the Happy Sad Club exists. And one of the things you just said about is, advocating mental health when you're not okay, and how I'm doing this, you're doing this ride for mental health, and yet there are times where you feel incredibly low. And I think that within itself is what's so powerful about it, is that, it's that perseverance through whatever you're going through and your willingness to feel it despite that and still push something. I think that's what I find so admirable in it, is that it's very clear that was not all sunshine and rainbows. And I think that within itself is so huge. And that's something that I think a lot of people get caught out on, is that, especially when processing their own experiences, is this need to be good all the time. That's why we put sad in the Happy Sad Club. It's that willingness to acknowledge the fact that there's another side to the coin.
I love,
and it's and it's really nice that you're willing to acknowledge that in your kind of experience, because I think a lot of people, they want it to look very polished, they want it to look very, perfect, and you're this strong symbol of something. And I think the strong symbol comes from the weakness within it.
I love that so much. Sorry to interrupt, but I basically describe myself a prickly pear, because I'm soft and I'm hard. Like, I'm just like I'm both, and I want to be both. I've always been a bit of a tomboy growing up, always kind of trying to prove myself in sport. So that was my way of being like, oh, I could do this. And I don't know, I built up this thing of being tough, and it, like, I'm a prickly pear. I could be soft and I could be hard, and I could be tough and I could be emotional. And I think I think so many people messaged me going, oh, you're inspiring, and I felt quite uncomfortable about that, because I don't feel it. I feel emotional and sad and scared, and I think that's what people can relate to. And I think that's what, I would never have done this ride if I only just saw, I don't know, I feel like people then go, oh, she's crying and she's having a bad time, but she's still doing it. Maybe I can go do that run or that walk or that thing that I wanted to do, because it's not all just strong people that are doing it in a polished way. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think all the things that have spiraled positively from my experiences have come from those more negative states of vulnerability. That willingness to just admit that there are not good things. I think people really connect with that. People find it quite isolating when they don't feel particularly good and they feel like they're surrounded by people that are. And I think, without talking about the Happy Sad Club too much, I think that's why we decided it was so important, was because we wanted to reflect on a platform that's quite literally like a curated album of people's highlights of good things, we wanted to show some stuff that was a little bit more raw and real. One of the things that comes from that with us is hearing about other people's pain. And in the previous area you just spoke about, you talked about that a lot, kind of having to hear about other people's experiences, and especially probably having to hear about other people's experiences with suicide. That must be such a bittersweet experience, because that is tough, because you have to reprocess every time what that is. But at the same time, there's obviously a reason that you're willing to do it. And I just wonder how you find the experience of that, having to hear about that, and what it feels like for you when people are willing to share with you.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely hard because I'm such an empath as well. So if someone, I met this lady, Amanda, in Aberystwyth. Basically, she not everybody joined me on a bike ride, because some people join me for a swim. I wanted it to be like available to anybody really. And anyway, we went for a coffee, and she had lost her lovely daughter Phoebe to suicide. And like we just hugged and cried basically. And it's really tough, because just seeing people, and also it brings back that pain that you had, so you're like, oh, I remember that pain. And it's just like but I don't know, it just felt, because I also remember that feeling of when I was with Zanny on the bike, and I remember talking to him, and I was like, there's something really powerful and opening up and talking about it. So it was like, yeah, it was painful but beautiful, and it's helping me and them. We're both kind of opening up, and I think and I just felt like some people joined me who are strangers I'd never met in my life, and some were like 6-foot men, farmer men, and it just, because I think I said safe space. Not many people have that opportunity, right? To be like, when you're with friends, even good friends or family, you don't know what if people are able and willing to listen to you, right? And so it was insane how much people just like pouring everything out, and it was like, wow. And so it was, yeah, I just the most magical but sad thing. And it was quite a lot actually during the second half, because it became like I didn't really have much time to process between people. It became like I'd have a day with someone and another day with someone, and I was like, oh, I just felt like I wasn't quite processing or having time to like downtime in between. But it was beautiful. Yeah,
it's amazing that to close that you call it beautiful, which I agree with. Because you wouldn't get rid of that experience. And I think that people's willingness to share and express, especially when it has been somewhat compressed, I think that is such a powerful experience. I think it's, in my opinion, having gone through it quite a lot, it's actually one of the most connecting experiences. Like, I've made bonds with people in such short spaces just by our mutual willingness to express emotion, which sounds absurd as a human.
I know.
But it feels quite rare.
And I've got friends for life. I've got absolute friends for life, and I guess also I got to understand. I'll never ever be able to truly understand why, like, what went through my dad's head and why. But I talked to people on the ride who had been and who had attempted to take their own life, and just the fact that they were willing to open up to me, and I could then ask them questions that I will never be able to ask my dad, but it felt like I got it a bit, I could understand. And it left me quite peaceful, sort of understanding a bit maybe of what my dad was going through. So that was pretty powerful.
Yeah, wow, that's a really interesting perspective. Obviously we've talked a lot about the ride, and I think obviously given what the platform is, how are you feeling post ride? Because obviously I imagine that's a huge shift after doing something for a quarter of a year.
Yeah, I'm not great. It's weird. I knew there was going to be a crash. But it just felt so powerful, and so, you know, the fact that I kind of got through, the ups and downs, like I got through stuff, and every day was so different, and every day was like I had to just get from A to B, and it gave me so much purpose. So yeah, coming back and sort of like trying to find work, and I think it's also when people go on really big trips and stuff like that, it's just like life was just so exciting and so different and so beautiful, and so every day was so different. So to come back and and even things like getting a cup of tea was like really difficult. It's like, oh, where am I going to get a cup of tea from? Like, where's the next cafe? Like, so now just being able to like boil the kettle, I'm like, oh, it just seems so like
it's too easy now.
Yeah, life's just too easy. So it's definitely given me a weird perspective, and like, so yeah, I'm and like it just felt like the door closed really quickly. It was like, oh my god, I just had the most amazing experience and all these chats with people. So that's why doing stuff like this really is really my happy sad, because it's like I'm feeling a bit weird, but I'm managing to do stuff like this where I can talk about it. I'm already feeling like great, so I'm feeling weird, but also I'd never change any of it. Like, I'd rather feel a bit lost now, and I've done that, so and I hope that some stuff will come from it. I've done some talks at a men's mental health group, and that was just, again, very beautiful and sad and powerful, and I've got some talks coming up and stuff, so stuff's happening. Yeah, but it's just a weird place at the minute.
Yeah, so, I mean, I hope for you that I get the impression that you'd obviously, especially from things you've said, like you want things to come from this, which is amazing, But I think that will happen. But it's also nice to know that should nothing else come from this, what you've still done is absolutely incredible. And listen, even if it just means that me and you get the opportunity to connect and a few people get to hear your story, that within itself is beautiful. But I do think things can come, and even if that means that somehow we manage to collaborate with you and do something, like, because we're my career is within the sports science fitness world anyway, so like that's something that me and my sisters and other members of the group are really conscious of. We actually did like a hike in November for Movember, and we did a men's only hike in Wales. So we're trying and organise more things like that around the chaos of our own lives. There's also a brilliant scientist that I'm friends with called Susie Bennett, and she specialises in male suicide. So I'd love to put you in contact with her, because I think she'd really, really enjoy speaking with you. I've been on multiple podcasts as a guest with her, and she's just amazing, absolutely amazing.
Please, because
I'll make sure that happens.
Yes, please. Because I'm actually doing a talk at a suicide conference on my birthday, which is going to be a weird one. But I'm really, really, again, it's like I've just got this fire of like, it's so weird, because for so long I was so angry with the mental health world and the mental health, I just felt very angry, and now I'm sort of standing there having a voice, so it feels like a very weird sort of turn of events, like so I'm doing that, but I also want some stats potentially to back up like my
she's the girl
thoughts. Exactly, so that would be amazing.
She's amazing.
Awesome.
She's amazing. I'll make sure I send you her Instagram.
Amazing.
I'll also send her this podcast, because I know she'd love to listen. And she truly is incredible what she's doing.
Yes.
But there was some other things that I acknowledged when I was looking through your Instagram and following your journey, and there was a kind of recurring theme. And again, I read a blog that you'd written that was really, really brilliant about kind of swimming and things like that. And I love how you said that you chose to cycle the coast because, and I quote, "I could also get in the sea and dip as I need it." Which is just such a cool little, as subtle as that is, that's actually a really beautiful thing. But I'd love to know, why is swimming and the ocean and water, why is that so special to you?
Yeah, so that's a really good point that because I was originally going to do Land's End to John O'Groats, and I was like, well, but I won't be able to get in the sea. I can't really this, I can't really explain it. I live, like, I'm very, very lucky. Live very, very close to the sea, and it's just a reset for me. So I used to compete. I used to be a competitive swimmer. So as a younger kid, it's like something I was good at. I wasn't good at school. I wasn't very good at like any of the brainy stuff, but I could swim, and that was something that my dad saw in me, and because I said that in that blog I wrote, actually, was I wanted to quit because I didn't like the competitive side. I'm a massive softie. I didn't want to compete. I didn't like sort of the racing side of it. But my dad was like, and normally if I didn't want to do something, Dad would be like, oh yeah, fine, we'll let you off. But he was like, no, I want you to stay doing that. And I thought it was my mum making me do it. And my mum was like, no, it was your dad who was like, he saw something. And I'm so glad that he did, because it gave me some sort of strength and some sort of like resilience that I click into every now and again, like on the ride. And that is because of swimming. And that was sort of the competitive side of swimming. But the other side of swimming is like, I'm very high paced all the time, but swimming is like, it's my meditation. It completely just calms me, and I find it the most soothing. You're just in this world as well, and you're kind of encompassed by water, and you're just like, it's just, you're like floating or flying. It's magic. And and for me on the ride, it was like a reset. It was like, as soon as I saw the sea, it made me feel good. I was like, oh yes, and then every time I got in the sea, it was like, it was psychologically, I felt like it was fixing my legs, and I didn't have any injury the whole ride. So I was like, that's the sea, it's the magic. But also it just kind of like, just reset. It just was, the perfect little
Yeah, I have a close friend who recently has gotten quite into swimming due to not being able to do other things. And she was saying as well how we're so used to in the gym, like training, heavy music, big stimulus. And yet when she was in the pool for that, say 45 minutes, it's just, it's just silence, or it's as close to silence as you can get. And that in itself is such an interesting experience. It is quite meditative, you're right. And I think there's something about water that does naturally calm us. But if you can create that affinity with it, the way that you clearly have, it's such a cool little tool to have. It's a consistent comfort. Like it's quite stable, because even if you're at different parts of the sea, it's still, one connected entity, without getting too, spiritual or, a bit funky with it. It does feel that way. And I think if you're willing to kind of perceive it in that way, it makes it feel very beautiful.
Yeah. And again, it's that thing of like, the world is a bit bigger than you think. Like, it just kind of makes you get out of your head a little bit. You're like, wow, there's so much to this world, and it's so beautiful, and I'm just a small fish in a big pond, and like, that's kind of cool, I think, sometimes. And I'm just so glad that I got into the sea lots, because it was kind of like, just good start or end to the day. Yeah,
I think the small fish mentality that you touch on is something I'm very conscious of. Is without sounding too, I'm quite into the darker sides of philosophy. So if I sound a bit deep, I apologize. But the idea of our insignificance being a strength, the fact that there's so many people and that there's so much going on that, not that our issues don't matter, because within our own little worlds they're very important, but recognizing that we are part of a much bigger thing. I think alleviates some of the tension and pressure of being. I think we persist in putting so much pressure on ourselves. And I think that is one of the interesting components of male mental health, is this internalized pressure to be a man. Obviously, that's something, despite not being a male, you're very conscious of. And I'd love your thoughts on, aside from mental health as a whole thing, like male mental health specifically, because I know it's something that you've got some opinions on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think I said to you earlier, I was on the ride, and I've been called soft a few times, and I've probably called people soft, but it really got to me when I was on the ride, because I think I said earlier that I'm a prickly. Did I say so? I'm a prickly pear.
Prickly pear.
Yeah, because I'm like, I've always fought against that. I was like, if someone said, oh, you're being soft, I would go harder. I was like, I'll prove to you I'm not, And I was like, oh my God, when I had that sort of thought on my ride, I was like, that's just I'm a woman. That's just a small part like men must have that on such a larger scale, and I don't think guys even know they sometimes put that pressure on each other, because and it was just, I was like, and I think I also said to you, I went to this men's mental health group, and it was such an interesting insight, because I just got to witness like the pressures that men are putting on themselves. They said they don't want to be a burden. They don't want to, this man was talking about his work, and it sounded horrific. And I was like, why don't you just tell your boss? Why don't you get some help? He's like, I can't do that. And it's like, and it was a really interesting insight. And another guy felt like he was in a really dark place, and he just didn't want to tell his mum because didn't want to burden her. And I was like, if you don't, you're taking that away from her. Like, let her, because it's that kind of thing. I think you're actually doing the opposite to people. Like, if people feel like they couldn't have helped you, that's then making them feel not good either. So it's I just urge people to keep, and they all kind of opened up, and they all just said how good they felt about talking. And it was just like, see, this is what you need to do. But I think it's just been ingrained with men for so many years. And like, if you're seeing your dad a certain way, you feel like you need to be that certain way, but it's like, it's not working. It's not working.
Yeah, it makes me feel like quite emotional when I think about things you say, because I feel very much like I was one of those people for so long. And I think when people meet me now, it's such a shock to hear that, because I'm so open, I'm so conscious. I'm trying so hard to progress the ideas of what it means to be a man.
And thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. But I certainly was, I didn't tell more than 2 people for nearly 2 years that I was struggling. So I know what it's like to have to kind of suppress because you feel like a burden. And I did feel like a massive burden. I still have to check myself on that now. But I'd love to know, obviously, a little bit of a segue into the darker things, but I'd love to know how did you feel, as a young woman, having to process all of those experiences, because you were 17 when your father sadly passed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, so that must have been a very interesting period of your life to have to deal with those things. And like, do you feel like you processed it at all at the start, or what was that, what was that experience like, if you don't mind touching on it?
No, I really want to, because I know that there's people out there either going through something like me, that have lost a parent or someone to suicide, or someone's going through some dark times. Because I think for me, and it's only actually really being able to talk about it now, later on in life, that at the time, I think it really, because my dad was my dad, he was my hero, he was my protector. If he didn't feel safe in this world, I suddenly was like, well, how can I feel safe? How can I feel, how am I going to get through life if you can't? And so that was massive for and I think it still is, really. I think and I just think for a really, really long time, I was just, everything felt so insignificant as well. I was like, how can I go to work? How can I go to school? Like I just don't want to. I just didn't want to do anything. I just didn't. But luckily something changed somewhere, where I was like, life is beautiful. This world is there is so much beauty in it. I want to live it for both of us. Like, I'm still angry at him, but I understand, like I don't want him to ever have been in pain. And I think in a weird way, there's sort of a little bit of relief there, to just know that he's not in pain anymore. But there's obviously so much guilt, and there's so much what ifs, and that's sometimes hard to deal with now, but I've got one life, and I want to live it to my fullest. And I know that when I go think to those thoughts, it's not good. You know, I don't feel good thinking about what if and how, and I should have done this and I should have done that, and what if he went to some, you know, what if you know, I can't change things, but I can change my life. I can try and make my life as better as possible, and I try and make other people's lives as better as possible. So that's where I'm at now. But yeah, you know, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. There's so many beautiful things. You know, you said like, how am I going to get through life if he can't, if you can't? That's something that I'm very conscious of, and that's like something that, as a young man that has, I will openly admit, had like various suicidal thoughts. One of the things I always used to say to myself was that if in my darkest times, if I feel like this for the next 10 years, it's not worth it. Like, it's not worth it. And that's an absurd thing to say and feel. And when you do see statistics and you do hear about things, I think suicide is now the biggest killer of young men, which is incomprehensible to me, and yet completely understandable at the same time. It's a bit of a paradox in my mind. You can't help but feel like, how am I supposed to not, you know, bind myself to that possible outcome? I do think there is still a lot of stigma around suicide, though, which is insane, because if it is as prominent as we now know it is, why do we still have such a taboo against it? And I think there's a quote by Simon Critchley. He wrote a book called Notes on Suicide. I might quote him a few times. And he wrote this from a point of feeling quite suicidal in his own life, which is interesting within itself. And the quote is, open quote, "Our simultaneous nearness and distance from suicide silences us." And I think that within itself is such an interesting perspective, that we are both so close to it and so far away from it at the same time. And I think that most people are afraid of it, maybe because there's you know, it's such a profound experience, maybe it's such a big experience, or maybe they've had some little thoughts and that scares them, so it's like a suppressive action, or maybe they just don't understand it, or maybe they think it's selfish. I think there's definitely a recurring theme that suicide is a selfish thing, which I have quite strong beliefs on as well, as being a completely insane thing to say. But I would love to know what your thoughts are around the stigma around suicide, like the way maybe people have interacted with you around it, the way you've seen people respond to it. It's quite a loaded question, so I appreciate if you want to break it up a little bit. But
I feel very passionate about this, because it's such an interesting topic, because actually for so many years I found it really difficult to tell people how my dad died, because I didn't want them to make a judgment of my dad, and I didn't want I think I said this in a video that my friend made, because I found it very difficult to say how I feel about all of it. But I wrote a letter to my dad, and my friend made it into a video, and it kind of explains things really well. But I just didn't want him to become, oh, Katy's dad who took his own life. I didn't want his name to be lost. I didn't want him to lose all the beautiful things that made him him. And sadly, I felt like the suicide just took over the room. It took over. It kind of, and that's why it was so difficult. And as I grew up, like a lot of my friends in Cornwall didn't know how my dad died, because actually it was like a sort of, I could talk about my dad and not have any judgment or preconceptions, and that was like a nice thing, to be able to talk freely about my dad and who he was. So to decision to do this ride and to open up about how my dad died was really hard, and I was really worried about my family. I didn't, you know, because it would bring up a lot, but I know that he would want people, or I know he'd want me to help. I know he would want his story shared if it could help someone else. And I think that's the thing. I think it's talking about suicide more. So if someone is feeling suicidal, I think as soon as someone can say, I'm feeling suicidal, I think it's one of the biggest I've heard. It can be such a release. And so I think it is just that thing of keep talking about suicide. Let's not make it it. I think so many people have suicide, more people than we think have suicidal thoughts. It's just when they don't talk about it, and they don't open up, that's when that's when it can take over. So I think it's just like not normalizing it, but sort of we need to talk about this. And so yeah, but it is, you know, when I did talk about it, when I do say it, people are a bit strange about it, and people don't know how to talk about it. But actually, since I've done my ride, so many friends, like distant people, have got in contact saying, I felt suicidal, I went through this. And I'm like, wow, where, you know, like I go to I do things with this person, I had no idea. And so I think there is a relief when I do talk about it. People have come to me, friends, saying, yeah, I was there, or I'm feeling that at the minute. And I think it helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because obviously you've probably had so much more first-hand experience of this than most people now. In terms of, especially by opening up over this thing. I have two like theories of stuff like this. Like my first theory is that there's no people that aren't interesting. There's just, you're not asking them the right questions. And the second one is that people will give you honest answers if you ask honest questions and show intent and presence. And sometimes it's even, if you have an inkling, just asking the same question twice. And if they're not ready, they're not ready. But it's, you know, you talked earlier about the exchange or the openness of people to you and how they share things with you, and that can be tough sometimes. But there's something around this element of just being willing to take a small piece of their pain so that they can alleviate a lot of theirs, I think is huge. And this like reciprocal sharing, it almost creates like a synergy of health. And I think that is what you can potentially provide for people in terms of around these conversations. And I think that's why people are saying these things to you, is because you've been willing to share a small piece of yourself, which gives them the opportunity to share a large piece of themselves. And I think that interaction is incredible.
Oh, what you've just said about the synergy of help. There's something in it about, you know, you feeling dark and then helping other people by talking about it. And it just is this beautiful circle of life of like, I don't know, because actually on my ride, like I was, you know, it looks like I'm helping people, right? But also I was getting so much help. I was getting so much help. It even makes me, I feel like at the minute, I had so much help, I don't even know how to repay people, you know. And it's just like, but that whole thing of just like, oh, I'm helping people, and actually no, they were helping me just as much, in fact even more. And I think it's just that beautiful, what you just said, synergy is yeah.
And that's what I think the Happy Sad Club is. It's like I always say, like I started this selfishly as an opportunity for me to just have these experiences and to place myself within a circle of people that are also willing to do that. And the intention was that people would be willing to be vulnerable with us as a way of reaffirming that it's okay to be that thing. And the response has been huge. And I hope that that's happened with you too. We're very lucky that so far we haven't really had any negativity around it, really. Maybe people that don't get it, or that's probably the wrong thing to say. It's not that they don't get it, it's that they don't connect with it in that way, but they appreciate what we're trying to do. I think that the climate of people's attitudes now is so much better than it was even like 5 years ago. I think this is the right time to do it. It's in a very, like, mental health has become very progressive, and in a way I'm almost trying to make it cool. Like I want people to wear like mental health on a t-shirt and make it not seem such a big thing. But have you had any sort of negativity or any, you know, resistance or people that don't get it, or, you know, have you been pretty good?
I've been pretty good.
That's great.
I don't had anything at all. Like I you know, not that I know of. So I think, and that in itself just shows like, and people, you know, after I went to that mental health thing, people want to help. I had strangers sort of bending over backwards to help me, like feeding me, like, you know. I remember going to a campsite, and there was an old man, and he seemed like real tough as old boots, and he went and got me 20 quid for the charities, and he opened up about his stuff, and people want to help, people want to talk. And I think it's just, we've just sort of created this weird world where we don't, I don't know, where we don't think we should share. And it's like everyone wants to help, and so it's that, yeah, it's just, I think it's that thing of like, just please, like, tell people you're struggling, I think it's just like, people want to help. It makes people feel good to help, and that was a bit of a thing for me as well, is not turning stuff down. So on my ride I was like, no, don't do that, don't I don't need to have food, or and actually I think someone even said to me they want to let people help, and I was like, all right. And that was, it's that synergy again. So
yeah. And I think with suicide specifically, despite people's maybe attitudes that it is a selfish thing or they don't get it, I think that the preemptive element of that is that they obviously don't want people to commit that action. If someone does that and you feel affected by it, your response might be anger. And I think that's completely understandable as an acute response. But preemptively, I think people are much more open to helping. And Simon Critchley, again, I'll quote him one more time because he wrote something really, really nice, which is that open quote: "The important thing is to continue and to move steadfastly away from any simple-minded ideas of suicide as something in which one must be either for or against, defend or oppose. It is infinitely more subtle than that." And I think, as simple as that is, a lot of people do get caught in this idea that they have to have like a strong opinion on it. The same with mental health, like they have to have a strong opinion on depression. And younger people, like I'm only 26. I started having really bad depression when I was maybe 20, and I was very conscious of falling into that group of snowflake young kids that are all mental health issues. And I'm like, how do I combat this awareness that I'm perceived a certain way despite feeling a certain way? And I think that quote really helped me kind of understand the idea that there is a subtlety to the fact that this is just existing, and people's attitudes and perceptions are maybe reflective of their more global attitudes and perceptions. But I think it's the continuous kind of accumulated actions of hopefully people like myself and you and all those other people that are willing to even just listen or share or donate or think, that creates better outcomes. And I've been particularly surprised by how well received I've been by older generations. And you said about the old man, and it's like I had this strong idea that they would see what I'm trying to do as this, oh bloody hell, another young sad kid. And actually the way they've been received and interacted with has been huge, and it's really, really refreshing. I don't know if you feel the same, but like it's just so refreshing to know that is there.
100%. In fact, I think it actually, it was the older men that I encountered that just I had the most profound chats with, and even just bumping into men at the pub who just were like, what are you doing? Like, what? And just then having a chat, they were like, oh, I've been there. I've and I had the most like big burly men give me big hugs and just kind of like completely let their guard down. And I think also that's why maybe when I was at this talk, I was told that they opened up a lot more. And I think maybe because if you show vulnerability and you show softness, people I think are more wanting to show that more than ever. And so if they get that chance, I think they want that. So yeah, I know what you mean. And I think when my dad died, I think a bit of like, oh, he's selfish. Oh, there was a lot of anger towards it. But I think that's just people's internal, stuff going on there.
Yeah. No, it's nice. At the very least, you've probably given a lot of people an opportunity to think, and sometimes that's all it is just planting a small seed. I think sometimes with the bigger things, it's less about being so aggressively, you need to understand this. It's just dropping little hints of like people slowly acknowledging and realizing, and I think that's a much healthier way.
100%, because I think for me anyway, I was having sort of imposter stuff about like, oh, is this helping? Is this, what am I doing? Is this doing any good? Is this? And it's like exactly like you said, like a little seed. And I think that's what I keep telling myself when I'm like, because I felt a bit strange sometimes, because sometimes I felt like a bit of an imposter. I was like, well, I don't know. I've had my dark times, but I don't know what my dad went through, and so how can I be an sort of advocate, because I don't know, and I don't know what the answers are. I don't know how to solve it. Sometimes that would get in my head, and I'm like, how can I sort of be an advocate for all this? But I'm like, no, you little seeds, like, just what helps me. This is what helped me, and this is what I see. And so and yeah, I think it is just that thing of some, even people. So I learned along the way that saying the word committed, right, isn't very nice, because it used to be a crime, right? Suicide used to be a crime, right? So that's why the word committed is used. And so even just on my journey, meeting people who have absolutely had no suicidal thoughts or no connection with suicide, but then they learned that, I learned that and I passed that on, and they've kind of gone, oh yeah, like, it isn't a crime and we should stop using that word. And it's just passing that on as well. And I was like, oh, there's a little seed there, that can then that knowledge can be passed on.
Yeah, I never made that connection either. That's so interesting. But yeah, that must be such an interesting thing to have to battle, is this idea of being an imposter. But I suppose it depends on the perspective, because you might be an imposter in the world of male suicide, even though that's understandably so, because in theory everyone that hasn't killed themselves is an imposter to suicide, which I find fascinating. But your experience within itself, like, you represent such a large proportion of people that have been through that, and I think what you do is you represent, I don't always love the word hope, because I think it's too bound to fruition, but you represent a symbol of what could be taken from such big experiences. And I think that's what life is, in a certain sense, is this willingness to represent something from a reflection or some adversity. And I think it's a very hard thing to do that, and to be so vocal about it for the sake of not only yourself but for other people, because this is bigger than you. And I think you've continually shown that. So I think it's very, very cool what you've done. I think it's very impressive. I look forward to seeing all the things you do in the future, because I'm sure this isn't it.
No, and then that's where I'm at now. I'm like, oh, this can't be it. And it was so powerful, but new chapter, new things are coming. Still where and how, but yeah.
I do have two questions I think I want to start asking at the end of these things, and they're pretty obvious. But I'd like to keep you on the spot. But what are you happy about right now?
Oh, that's such a big question. I'm happy for the people around me. I'm happy for my family. I'm happy for my friends. I'm happy for my life. I am very have to have a little check-in sometimes when things are not that great. I'm like, I've got a good life. I've things aren't always going to go necessarily the way you want them to, or how you think they're going to go, but overall I've got a lovely family and lovely life. I'm also really happy, and this is quite hard to say sometimes, but I'm happy with who I am. And I don't know why I get emotional saying that, but I think it's been sorry, I wasn't expecting me to get emotional, but I think I've always struggled with like school and jobs and trying to fit in, but I think this ride has helped me so much. You don't have to force yourself down those certain routes, and just being a bit kinder on myself, like, yes, I'm not like certain people, and I will never be a certain way, and that's okay, because you can do other stuff. And I think this ride sort of given me that kind of like that mirror of like, you can do it, and you can do it your way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. You've even given me a little thumbs up. And then to contrast that, what are you sad about right now?
I'm sad my dad's not here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad for the people that are struggling. I'm I think that's it. I'm not it's not really a sad. I'm not. I'm sort of a bit lost. I'm not sad about that though. I'm just I'm sad about I missed my ride. I'm a bit sad about that. Um yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Trying to continually reflect the willingness to feel both things, which I think you've captured perfectly there. But it made me feel emotional when you got emotional, because I know how hard it can be to actually be on your own side, you know. But you have every right to be happy with who you are. You seem like a wonderful person, and you're doing wonderful things.
You too.
And it was lovely to speak.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you so much for doing this. Like, I feel so emotional and happy just from this chat. It's so good, and it's just like hearing your tales too, like how you've come through it and how you're now doing this. And I just think it's just so brilliant that, you know, we can both kind of fight the fight and be happy and sad, and it's good and bad, it's hard and tough, soft and hard, you know, all the things.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. It's really lovely. And I'm sure this is not the end. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Do you want to like put your Instagram or anything? Is there anything you've got coming up, or good?
My Instagram, which is a bit dormant at the minute. I've not been feeling very motivated to put stuff in there because I don't really know what to say at the minute. But I'm saddled to sea, and I'm hoping that I can kind of keep tapping into that when I feel I've got good stuff to say. I've got and I'll sort of talk about my talks on when they are on my Saddle to Sea. So yeah, we'll leave it as that.
Nice. Yeah. I think at the very least, people can go back and look at what you've done. You know, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that haven't heard about you, so it'll be really nice for them to go back through the highlight reel and see what you've been up to. Once again, Katy, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.